We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Oops. Okay, so we're going to finish up stress today, stress and health. Yes, lots of things like sex.
Okay, I just was trying to. My doctors were telling me.
How is it stressful? It creates an autonomic nervous system response. It increases the levels of epinephrine, norepinephrine. Your autonomic nervous system becomes more active. It's stressful. Yeah.
It just sounds like any type of exercise would do that.
Oh yeah, sure. Exercise is a stressor too. Yeah. Yeah.
They tell me
Okay,
that
I just not
not to
thinking of it the
exercise
same
when
way.
blood sugar's above a certain number because it can cause my blood sugar to go higher because if it's low, then I can.
Yeah.
It's weird. My doctors were just asking me this question when I was pregnant, like,
Yeah.
what kind of stress? And I told them all the negative stuff, and they're like, well, what about? And I was like,
Yeah.
stressful?
Well, your surprise and your question really just illustrates that just because something is stressful does not mean that it's bad for you. Those are two different things. And in fact, when we start talking about how we measure stress, how you can measure your own stress, one of the things that we get into is not the objective nature of whether the stressor activates your sympathetic nervous system, but rather how that stressor, how you perceive that stressor, and the perception, and how the perception affects your health rather than the stress itself. So
I guess I was thinking of something like drugs or something where it's fun at the moment maybe or something, but it's definitely bad for you. That's what I was assuming. That's how I imagined your question.
Well, in fact, you could take drugs and it would reduce the activation of your autonomic nervous system and you would feel less stressed.
Maybe stress just has the idea everybody has when you get the word stress is bad. So stress doesn't have to be bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just what we perceive it generally.
I understand when I think about it, but without thinking.
That's right.
I assumed her question was, is there something that's bad for you that's fun, basically, like drugs? That's only the example I can think of.
Oh, sure. There's lots of things that are fun, but that creates, that has negative effects in your life, certainly. But in terms of, if something is fun, your perception of that thing as fun is going to almost sort of offset any negative effects of the stress itself on your body. So it's really a perception thing. But we'll get into that today too. Yeah.
So the same activity will affect you completely.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sure, of course.
Depending on their perception.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, any other questions before we start out? So we're going to talk about a couple of different approaches to understanding stress and what stress is and defining it and measuring it. So we're going to talk about Selye, Hans Selye, and then we're going to talk about Lazarus as an alternative to Selye. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we measure and appraise stress. So here's the deal with Selye. Selye does his research starting out in about the 1930s. And he's active in research right up until the 1980s. And he's going to come up with the idea, the concept, of what will become known as the General Adaptation Syndrome, or the GAS. And the General Adaptation Syndrome describes the physiological changes that an organism goes through as it responds to stress. Okay? And what he's going to say is that the stress response is nonspecific. Essentially, you get the same stress response regardless of what kinds of stressors are present in your environment. So when we talk about stress, we went through that little slideshow with the pictures, and I said, well, what is stress? You know, is stress your job? Is stress your response? Is stress the interaction? Mostly when we talk about stress, we talk about stressors, which are the actual stimuli in the environment that are going to evoke a response, right? Whereas when we talk about stress, we're specifically referring to an organism's response to that stressor. So when an organism experiences this stressful stimulus, how does the organism's response is what we're actually going to be referring to when we say stress. So stress is your response, but there are plenty of stressors out there, right? And as we said, two different organisms may have different responses to the same stressor. But according to Selye, the way that the response happens is going to be the same regardless of what the stressor is. Questions on this?
Meaning that the physiological response is going to be the same no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you think it's a good one or a bad, it doesn't matter
Mm-hmm.
your perception.
Mm-hmm. According to Selye. But we'll see that that's a problem. Yeah. So when Selye describes the General Adaptation Syndrome, he says we go through three different phases. And in the first phase, he called the alarm or reaction phase. And during this phase, your body has to realize that there's a stressor there, and then it has to start making some physiological changes that are going to allow you to respond to that stressor effectively, right? So if if somebody says, hey, look out, and they point above me and I look up, and there's a 20-ton weight falling down toward me, I'm going to have to activate some kinds of systems in my body that are going to allow me to do what? Get the heck out of there! So this is the point at which they say your stress resistance will go down briefly as your body has to suddenly start responding by all kinds of metabolic processes that are going to divert a lot of your resources to energy, to being able to respond, to being able to run away, or to being able to confront the threat. And then usually once you've confronted the threat or you've run away, there's a period called the resistance phase. And in the resistance phase, if you're still exposed to the stressor, your stress resistance is going to go up for a little while. But at a certain point, what's going to happen is it's going to start to tail off. And when it starts to tail off, when you're not able to, to keep coping with the stressor minute after minute, hour after hour, day after day, what's going to happen is you're going to start moving into the third phase where you'll go through exhaustion. And so you'll read about a musician who's on tour, and they're doing a show every night, and they've got a lot of obligations, and they go, and they're constantly in this state of stress, and one day they just kind of keel over in exhaustion, and their body basically says, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. Because the sympathetic branch of your autonomic nervous system, remember, is pumping all those stress hormones through your system. And you're maintaining a high level of activation, metabolic activation in all of your bodily systems, and eventually it takes a toll. And your body says, nope, no more. And that's when you go into exhaustion. You faint and...
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Can't get up and have trouble maintaining electrolyte levels and things like that. So it's very dangerous to stay in these stressful situations. Now here's the deal. This is really good. This is a great response system, and it works really well for what?
Temporary stuff.
Short term, like, the 20-ton weight, right? Or the tiger on the trail, the mountain lion on the trail, right? Mobilize your systems, get the heck out of there, and then you can come back to normal. The problem is that we don't live in a world of those kinds of stressors for the most part anymore. For the most part, we might almost get into a car accident and that activates you for a little while and then you calm down. But for the most part, when we talk about damaging or dangerous stressors, we're talking about these long-term situations. Maybe your boss doesn't like you at work, but he can't afford to fire you, and so you keep going to work every day, and you realize, he doesn't like you, and he wants to find somebody else, and you feel like you're not doing a good job, and it just goes on and on and on and on, and pretty soon there's nothing left, right? So this response system is not very adaptive for our contemporary social stressors. It is extraordinarily good for the kinds of stressors that we probably faced in our evolutionary past, right? Okay, so questions on this stuff? So Cellier's gas, what do we say about Cellier's gas? As I said, basically Cellier said this is a physiological response, and it's a very basic response that all organisms have built into them. But all of his subjects were non-human. He didn't run human studies, and because he was more interested in controlling the variables in his studies. So that's one of the criticisms, and the idea that as humans we have pretty unique ways to respond to environmental stressors that maybe a lot of animals don't have. For example, two entirely different people will have two entirely different perceptions of a stressor. We'll see something that one person says, that freaks me out, and another person, it doesn't, right? In addition, humans do this interesting thing with interpretation and cognition. So we interpret events, and when we do this interpretation, remember, we make interpretations of events not just based on the present, situation, right? Because a lot of things that we're afraid of in the present tense are not fearful. Mostly we're afraid of what? The future or the past or some sort of combination of what might happen based on what happened before, and is she really going to like me? Right? And this is like real, very different kinds of stressors than probably most animals go through. We don't have a lot of evidence of future cognition in animals. So it's this future casting that we do that oftentimes is this very intense stress. We worry about what hasn't happened yet, okay? And, some of us are more neurotic than others in that way, but... Okay, so the criticisms of Selye are valid, but his basic description of the physiological process, when we look at human responses to stress, comes out about the same way. All mammals essentially respond the same way. So when we go beyond Selye, we get to Richard Lazarus. And Lazarus is going to come along in the 1980s, and he's going to start doing research with humans on stress responses. And when he expands his research to humans, he's going to define stress specifically as the human response to the perception of threat and vulnerability. Okay? So when you see a stressor, you're going to have to perceive it as threatening, or you're going to have to perceive a vulnerability that you have as a result of that stressor. So losing a job for one person may be stressful, for another person maybe not, right? Based on their subjective perceptions. Did you really like that job? Did you not like that job? Did you have money in the bank, so losing a job isn't a big deal? Are you living paycheck to paycheck, so you're on the street if you don't have a job, right? So all kinds of other situations are going to come into play in terms of how you interpret and perceive that stressful situation. And as I said, when we think about future events, that's all about perceiving a threat or a vulnerability that doesn't exist already, right? So in that way, we've got these really kind of somewhat unique patterns and processes. I already talked about this. And we've got this interesting thing about optimism. Some of us are very optimistic. Some of us are pessimistic. And optimists, when we talked about unrealistic optimism and realistic optimism, someone with unrealistic optimism may not be stressed out by the fact that they're having unsafe sex. Someone maybe with a more realistic optimism or a pessimistic view is going to be stressed out by the same kind of thing, right? Right?
So if you say something nasty happens to you, but then you can see something good coming out of it, do you obviously still go through the stress, but is it changed if you have a different outlook on it?
Well, that's so the question is, when you go through a stressful or traumatic event and you perform what's called a reframing of it or a reinterpretation of it as being, I lose my job, but now I have an opportunity to change careers, which I didn't feel free to do before I had lost my job, right? Really what it is, your stress is going to go down. You're reinterpreting in a different way. You're changing your perception. And it's a coping mechanism. It allows you to cope with the stressor by saying, I didn't really want that job anyway, right? Even if it's true or not.
So you're going to
Sometimes we do a lot of that. We do a lot of like lying to ourselves to make ourselves feel better, don't we?
I thought that was just people being stupid.
No.
well, yeah, but no.
People who do crazy things are not crazy. As human beings, we do a lot of weird kinds of stuff. We study this in social psych. If you're interested in that, take that course. But this is called cognitive dissonance. You already read about cognitive dissonance. Yeah, it's cognitive dissonance. So in order to reduce that arousal, we make up excuses for why we did something or why we do something, and that helps us feel better about ourselves, right? So it's kind of a way of coping, right? So when Lazarus talks about stress, he's going to define a concept of psychological stress, which is going to be a little bit different than Sellier's physiological stress response. And he's going to say psychological stress is a particular relationship between the person and the environment, okay? So you've got the person, and then you've got the environment the person is in. And that relationship, if it is appraised by the person as taxing or exceeding the resources that you have available to deal with that environmental stressor, or endangering your well-being. So here's the pivotal word here, appraised. So it's your appraisal that's going to really determine how stressful something is. You have control, really, is what that says. So there's an optimistic part of it. On the other hand, because it's an environmental stressor that you can't control, and it's going to endanger your well-being, or...
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Exceed maybe your resources you have available to deal with it, that's going to be stressful. So you've got some control over your appraisal, but the stressor itself and your resources you may not have a lot of control over. So that's sort of good news, bad news in there.
But you can still eliminate some of the stress by your appraisal.
Yeah. Again, that cognitive reframing. Yeah. So this is what we call a transactional approach to understanding stress. That there's a transaction between the person and the environment. The person contributes something and the environment contributes something, and what we get, the product of the transaction, is stress. And that transaction, that interaction, that the combined contributions of the environment and the person are going to be moderated by the appraisal that you do. So your appraisal is going to modify or moderate that transaction, right? So you can make it more stressful, you can make it less stressful with that appraisal, okay? And then finally, in order for something to be stress, the person has to perceive it as being a threat to their psychological well-being, okay? A challenge, that is that it provides an opportunity for growth, right? Or some kind of psychological harm. So are you actually harmed by the stressor psychologically? Okay. So Lazarus's approach is more comprehensive than Sellier's, especially when we start dealing with human beings rather than animals, okay? Because it's going to have much more of that cognitive approach. Remember, Sellier was working in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. What's the dominant paradigm in psychology? Along with the psychodynamic? For explaining behavior? The behaviorism, behavioral perspective. And so behaviorism says your behavior is a product of the history of reinforcement that you've had in the past. So it's very deterministic, and it doesn't consider the black box and what's going on up here. This is much more about the black box, and this is coming along in the 1980s after we've gone through the behaviorist approach and we've emerged into the cognitive psychological approach, right? Okay. Oh. Well, glad you could join us. How nice. Thank you very much. That's okay. I'm just joking around with you. I'm not serious. We'd rather be out there in the sunshine with you, though. Okay, so let's look at how Lazarus thinks of this appraisal process and how we approach appraising stressful situations. So he's going to say there's a primary appraisal, and we can appraise a stressor as irrelevant to us, right? So, I wake up in the morning, and I turn on the radio, and I find out there was, a cyclone that went through Burma, wiped out a bunch of villages. I'm sad about that. I'm a little bit maybe stressed, but mostly it's irrelevant to my life. The earthquake in China, probably more relevant, it's, because we're, a much bigger part of each other's economy and things like that. But, so the relevance is going to have an effect on how I'm going to appraise this stress. Also, my appraisal is going to depend on whether it's a benign or positive stress versus one that is harmful or negative, right? So you're talking about, how can sex be stressful? Well, it's stressful, but we appraise it as not being so stressful, right? And then whether or not it ultimately is a stress, it provides this physiological stress. What's that?
Probably more therapeutic.
Yeah, it could be therapeutic. I don't know. I think I want to go to your therapist. My therapist, well, he just gives me drugs. Maybe I don't want to go to your therapist. Okay, so when we appraise something as stressful, generally we think of it as being harmful, threatening, or challenging. And we generally think of it as being harmful, he says, when we experience these kinds of emotion: anger, sadness, disgust, contempt, right? Threat, when we appraise something as threatening, stressful and threatening, what we generally tend to feel are the kinds of afraid kinds of emotions. So fear, anxiety, worry, right? And when we appraise something as being challenging, we experience excitement or anticipation, right? When you go to your therapist's office, you experience lots of anticipation, right? So this is a nice, really nice, comprehensive kind of model for understanding how we can experience things so vastly different as individuals, right? So this is what he calls the primary appraisal, and we do this first, and then after that we go through a secondary appraisal, which says, okay, now that I've appraised it as being either irrelevant, benign or positive, or stressful in this way, what are my options? What can I do about it? Also, we have to ask ourselves, what's the likelihood that I can actually do anything that will reduce my stress, okay? Or will my actions be ineffective, right? Will my actions actually result in a stress reduction? And then he says, after we've gone through the primary appraisal and then the secondary appraisal, bless you, right? Is that a sneeze? Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. So then we go through this reappraisal. So now we go back and re-examine it. And because once we do this stuff, once we think about options, once we think about our likelihood and whether the actions I take will actually reduce the stress, that's going to change how we feel about the stress, right? The more control we have, the less stressed out we generally tend to be, right? Lack of control is one of the major stressors in your lives. And in fact, in organizational psychology, in terms of office environments, both social environments and physical environments, the more control you give your employees over their environment, both their physical environment and their social environment, and their perception of control in their job, the less stressed out they're generally going to be. So control is a huge thing for people, being able to control your environment. That's what we do. That's what really makes us a lot different from animals, isn't it? We control and modify our environments. And most animals live within the habitat and the environment. You know, for better or worse, right? Global warming is partly a product of us controlling our environments and altering our environments, right? So, questions on this stuff?
Are all these different appraisals like more cognitive or are they more like subconscious?
You know, I would say Lazarus would probably say they are active cognitive appraisals. We may do them without conscious awareness.
It seems like people do like this naturally.
Yeah,
Thinking about it.
it could be without conscious. I don't know if Lazarus specified one way or the other. So what I'm passing out to you is the stress appraisal measure. You're welcome. And this is a scale.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
That's used to interpret and to maybe measure and quantify your appraisal of a particular situation in the future, okay? So you've got an exam coming up when? A week from today? No. 2 weeks from today. Yeah, because we don't have class next Thursday. So a week from Tuesday then. Yeah, right after I get back. Is that right? Yeah, because we're doing the lab on Tuesday. So you've got an exam coming up. I would like you to fill out this stress appraisal measure in reference to how you are feeling about that exam coming up. Okay? So it gives you a bunch of questions, and then you indicate whether you say not at all, slightly, moderately, considerably, extremely. So go ahead and do that. Circle. Yeah. Yeah. How you feel today? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, don't imagine your stress in the future. That's like you need more stress, but. And I'll pause the podcast. Well, actually, I'll let you do that, and we'll take a little break too, and then we'll come back and interpret the stress appraisal measure. Okay. So now that, hey, hello. Now that you've filled out the stress appraisal measure, it's time to give yourself a little bit of scoring on it. Now, there are these 7 different subscales to the stress appraisal measure. So what I'd like you to do is add together the numbers on each of these subscales to represent an index for threat, for example. So go ahead and add each of these question numbers together, the score of each of those questions numbers together, to get your subscale scores.
We should have lines across this so you can tell which one to pick.
Yeah, I'll put those on there next time. Yeah.
He's like, yeah, I'll take that, sure.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
I'll tell you in a minute. So add together your score on each of these items to get the subscale total for each of these subscales. So add together the number you circled on question 5 plus the question 11 plus question 20 plus question 28. Okay, you guys are cruising right along. So, well, I'll start because the people that I'm going to ask are here. So, Gleanne, Jared, and Laura, in order, what are your scores for the threat scale? 5. 7. 12. Okay. And challenge? 14. Okay. And centrality? 4. 12. Okay. control self? 20. 20. Okay. Okay. 17. Okay. And 20. Okay. Wow. Huh. 15. And then uncontrollable? 5. 4. 6. Good. And then stressfulness? 9. 7. 12. Okay. Good. So, do you see any kind of patterns there? Laura scores quite a bit higher in terms of threat. And also notice that she winds up scoring a little bit higher. So there's threat and stressfulness are pretty tightly correlated in this particular case. For most of you, the degree to which you think that exam, the outcome of that exam is uncontrollable, or the stress from it is uncontrollable, is very low. Right? So you generally tend to feel some mastery over the stress itself in the exam indirectly. And most of you also scored fairly high in the control scores. Now, as we said, threat has to do with the degree to which you feel that situation poses a risk of harm to you, either psychologically or physically. Challenge, remember, is about excitement, is about potential for growth, things like that. And so for the most part, you guys scored in the middle on that. Centrality was a big difference here. And centrality has to do, what are the question items for centrality? What's the question for number 6? Okay, and number 9? Okay, and number 13? Okay, and number, what is it, 27? So you get the idea of centrality? It's like, how much does this situation form a core for your present sense of self and then your future sense of self, right? And, Gleanne has a relatively low score there.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
The other two have a little bit higher. Now, I have a suspicion here. I suspect that I'm pretty sure I know that you have children. Oh, okay, you've got the business. You've got a lot of other stuff going on outside, and I wonder if the two of you may have sort of your identity is more tied into your success on the exam or indirectly in the class than yours might be, where you've maybe you've formed this unique identity.
I don't have a specific major, I'm still kind of working on that. So it's like maybe if I had a specific thing, it would have more weight. But since I'm still kind of figuring it out,
Okay.
it might have more weight because, you know what I'm saying?
Are you guys thinking of majoring in psychology or something related? No? Okay. So why do you think you guys have a higher centrality score? Any ideas?
I did terrible on the last test.
Okay.
This next test kind of weighs on a lot of my grade. Well, not a lot of my grade. So it's kind of grade.
Okay. Okay.
That was more of just GPA and maybe grade in class as opposed to my overall health
Okay.
or well-being.
Right. Right. Any ideas?
I did not take the grade telling the scholarship, so.
Okay. So there's a lot riding on it. Yeah. So again, this is the idea of appraisal. You're appraising the centrality much differently than the two of them, right? So So how you appraise something is going to ultimately contribute to really how stressful it's going to feel to you.
What if your centrality
Then you need to get a life. I think mine would be really high too.
like what 18 would be? That's really high or not?
Well, if you consider that the maximum would be 20, right? 5 times 4. 18 is pretty close to the maximum, yeah.
Is there a reason my threat is much lower than my stress?
Probably because threat composes maybe less of your appraisal of stress than does challenge or centrality or, control, possibly. I'm not sure. Yeah. Okay, so this is just a way to get a general measure of how you're appraising a stressful situation. And someone, if, for example, if a psychotherapist was working with you, they might be able to say, oh, well, look, if you score 20 on centrality, they're going to go, I wonder how you could reappraise this so it's not quite as important to your core sense of self and future and stuff like that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Don't think of yourself as pathological for sure. I don't think there's any pathological values here. Okay. So that's the general stress appraisal measure. So we can get a kind of measure of your stressfulness overall, but then also in these sort of sub-items and sub-areas where you can focus. For example, with a cognitive behavioral therapist, you might be able to focus working on improving, reducing these scores in terms of stress. Yeah, question? Yep.
If the self-control aspect is
No, generally, if you have relatively high control self, that means that you have an appraisal that you have control over the outcome, as opposed to other people having control over the outcome, perhaps. Internal sense of control. Internal locus of control, possibly. I don't know what the correlation is with internal locus of control.
So the others, is that a high others? Does that mean other people in the same situation, how much control they have? Or how much do
I don't
other
think
people have
so.
control of your situation?
What are the questions?
like how much help can you get?
It has to do with.
Is the outcome of the situation uncontrollable by anyone?
Oh, okay. And what else? What are the other
Down
questions?
the other
I'm sorry.
course.
I'm sorry, let me go back.
So
4,
like
15.
Is the what?
Is there
15.
anyone to help you manage this problem? Is there anybody to help you cope with this problem?
Oh, really?
Okay, so the control has to do with being able to call on others rather than others being in control, maybe. Yeah.
So if you have a high others control, just means you what's it?
Means you appraise the situation that you can call on other people for
You can ask for
assistance. Yeah.
I kind of how I kind of see that is, and I know I have a tendency to do with it is like my control for self. I have that high, and I also kind of project my expectations for myself on others, which is not always the best thing because not everybody is like you, and other people can have other difficulties in areas. So, necessarily having a 20 may not necessarily be good when I'm at work expecting workers to uphold the standards I hold for myself, and they may, you know what I mean? It seems like projecting my expectations for myself on others.
Okay.
So
All right.
there might be things that people don't have as much control as you do.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Don't forget that if you're the boss, you're in charge, but the people working for you, they may have a whole different perspective. Sure. Yeah. Okay. So Lazarus not only has some ideas about how stress works, but also how we respond and cope with the stressor. And so remember the second phase of the general adaptation syndrome is about responding to the stressor and coping with it. And so Lazarus says he defines coping as the constantly changing cognitive and behavioral efforts that we that we expend, the effort that we use to help manage those external and or internal demands that we appraise, again, as being taxing or exceeding the resources that we have available, right? So what this means is, first of all, that coping is a process. It's not an end. It's not a product. It's a constantly changing process that we change our coping behaviors in response to the success or failure of our coping efforts that we've tried to use in the situation, right? So we learn from our coping efforts what works, what doesn't work. The second important thing here that he says, it's not an automatic process. Coping doesn't happen automatically. It's something that we actually have to learn. So an effective thing to teach children in school, elementary school especially, is how to cope with stress, how to cope with, their classmates that are taunting them, how to cope with the demands of the school, how to cope with, difficulty they're having with their parents or something like that. So, and what it means is you have to teach somebody to try new strategies, right? Because these things don't just come to us automatically. But a lot of us don't get taught how to cope with stressful situations. And then another important factor that Lazarus identifies in this definition is that it takes effort to do this. It's not as if this comes without its own costs in terms of energy, time, resources. And what's important for coping is that we get a sense that we are able to manage and control our situation. Again, this comes back to that issue of control. The more control we feel over our environmental situation and over these stressful situations, the more likely we will feel as if we're successfully coping. Whoops, sorry. Didn't mean to flip that. Okay. In what ways do you feel like, or do you not feel like you've been taught coping? Or have you just learned it trial and error, maybe? Did anybody have any, do you remember ever learning it really explicitly?
We were like in grade school. I remember there was like the calm down thing where you're supposed to like count to 5 or like take a deep breath.
Oh, good.
And exhale.
Awesome.
Like it was like in grade school, like maybe like 4th, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. Somewhere around there that they taught us breathing techniques and things like that.
And then that was it, and then?
I think that was pretty much it. I'm sure in health class, like
I don't know.
middle school and high school, they taught us other things. I don't know.
Yeah, right. We'll actually do some stress management stuff in the lab on Tuesday. So yeah. What else? Any other coping skills that you've learned along the way with stress?
Basically, just observation at home. Probably
Watching your parents
right.
coping successfully.
Probably anything that they tried to teach me in school, I thought was kind of silly.
So a lot of times this will come from parents, but of course if the parents have never learned it, then they're going to have a hard time teaching it to their children too. And
When I was a kid, like we weren't allowed to like hit each other, but my mom said that you can still get your anger out by hitting your pillow or screaming into your pillow. You can
Sure.
scream for long or as much as you want, but you can't touch your sister.
Sure.
So I used to try to beat my sister with a vacuum.
Well, hopefully you would be able to deal with the stress before you got to the anger and aggression part. But
Like when I was like 6 or 7, I don't know, I just would hit her.
yeah. But, for kids, for real young kids, it's really hard, isn't it? Why? What part of the brain hasn't developed fully that's involved with impulse control and all of it? Impulse control, planning. The frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex. And that really doesn't develop until adolescence. And even then, sometimes the early to mid-20s. And so it's hard for kids.
Is that really a coping mechanism then?
Self-control and self-regulation? Sure. Yeah, being able to regulate your arousal. Sure. Yeah.
Also, personalities, probably. I would think personalities would have a big part in
Yeah.
how you respond to that.
So what we call temperament in children a lot. Yeah, sure. So here's what Lazarus proposes for coping and how coping works. He says coping requires, first of all, that you be healthy and that you have energy available. Because when you're sick or when you're tired, your ability to summon those effortful resources that you're going to need to actually do the coping is low, right? In addition, he says, you need to have a positive belief in your ability to actually change the situation, right? Or to change your appraisal. If you don't believe you can positively affect the situation or the outcome, then that's going to be a problem for coping. It's going to make coping difficult. Also, he says, coping is a skill. And like any skill, you need to be able to solve problems. You need to be able to identify problems and then creatively find solutions to those problems. You need to have developed social skills, okay? Because sometimes you need to reach out to other people for help as part of your coping, right? And that's also going to involve what's consistently going to come up as a great buffer against stress, illness, psychological disorders is social support. Having a network of friends, having a network of family members, having a religious community that you can reach out to that's going to be able to provide you support as part of your coping. And then finally, he says, sometimes we just need money. We need the stuff that's going to allow us to, to work on coping. If you're out of money and you're sick and you don't have any energy and you have negative attitudes and you haven't developed these kinds of skills, that's a recipe for stress without coping, okay? And that's not good. That's not good.
Well, and the lack of one of those can have an effect.
Deficiency in any one of these areas is going to diminish your ability to successfully create a coping strategy. Okay, so that's pretty much Selye and Lazarus. Any questions on this stuff? I like Lazarus's models. I think they're really worthwhile and really useful. Let me go pass these out later. Okay. So let's talk about what actually happens in your body in terms of physiological effects of stress, right? As we said, with the general adaptation syndrome, it's no problem when you go into a stress, you encounter a stressful situation, and your body mobilizes the resources it needs to respond to that stress. That's fine. The problem, and you go through those two stages, the alarm stage and the resistance stage. The problem is when you go past the resistance stage and you start going into this exhaustion stage. And that's where we see problems in people's health as a product of stress. Because your body can't tolerate that intense activity, that intense sympathetic nervous system activity for very long. And what we generally tend to see at this point, up until you get into the exhaustion stage, your sympathetic nervous system is able to be countered effectively by the parasympathetic. Remember, because they're both active at the same time. And the parasympathetic counters the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic is activating, parasympathetic is calming or reducing the activation. Okay? So in the exhaustion stage, the parasympathetic nervous system can't keep countering the effects of the sympathetic nervous system. So what happens is the sympathetic is active without being countered, and that's when you go into exhaustion, right? Because your body can't stay in that constant state of activation. Do you remember? Do you remember cortisol and corticosterone? The hormones that are very damaging to your body systems, right? Your blood sugar is at a high level, and that's going to cause problems in your body systems. And eventually, your body systems are going to shut down because they can't continue to be activated. Yeah, yeah. It's not like, it's not like, I'm a little bit tired today, so I'm going to have a cup of coffee to wake up, right? This is like having a cup of coffee and having another one, having another one, having another one, having another one, and then a Red Bull, and then another one, and then half, and more, and then right? Can't keep that up. Yeah, yeah. You just like to see me jump around like a monkey. I know you.
When you just think about it, it's like the thing that keeps you calm shuts down. So why do you fall over in exactly when the thing that's holding you back shuts down?
What keeps you calm is keeping you from wiping out your body's reserves. See? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I understand that, but I guess everything where you finally, like that would calm down, then you'd have like a burst of energy, and then you'd fall over.
Okay, well, sure, yeah,
Okay,
that's fine.
Okay.
If you want to, if you want to think of it that way, that's good. Yep, you can do that. That's fine. Yep. And so, so what stresses us out? Well, when we talk about stressors, we generally tend to think of some pretty significant kinds of life changes. So these are some of the major ones. When someone close to us dies, that's a real high-level major life stressor. When we get divorced, right? Similarly, when we get married is also a pretty strong stressor. And unemployment certainly is. Again, these are all going to depend on your appraisal of the situation, right? So for some people, divorce is going to be a more, or perhaps, some people are going to have a less of a stress response because their appraisal of the future consequences, their appraisal of centrality, their appraisal of threat, all those things are going to be different. Pretty close, as I recall. It's not on this list. Yeah, that's it. How high is that? That's number 20? Oh, what are you looking at?
Oh, it's number.
Are you looking at the social readjustment scale? 32?
It's number 32.
Yeah.
Value.
Okay. So that's relatively low, actually. Yeah. Okay, so what I passed out is a set of 4 questionnaires, and the first one is an assessment of major life event changes and the relative stressful contribution that those have, right? And so basically the instructions are to, score this out. You can do this on your own time. score this out, and then add up the scores. And it says on the back, if your score is 300 or more, you stand an 80% chance of getting sick in the near future. If your score is 150 to 299, it's about 50%. Less than 150, about 30%. So how this was developed was they gave it out to people, and then they looked at those people's physiological responses. Did they get sick in the future? Did they not get sick? And so from that data, they were able to come up with these cutoffs that kind of indicate your statistical risk for stress-related illness in the future. But notice that there's not much here in terms of appraisal, is there? Like, how do you appraise? I might appraise marital separation very differently from you do, but it's got the same score for each of us. So there's some validity and reliability questions on this scale.
You just, if this has happened to you, you just take that number and add it.
Yeah.
You score it as what you feel like out of 73, whatever the number out of 100.
No, you take the value of 100 and add it together. Yeah. So in addition to these major life changes, and in fact, what we're seeing that has a larger effect on stress and stress-related illnesses are these long-term sort of day after day after day kinds of stressful experiences. Oh, incidentally, the second page of that handout is a modification of that social readjustment scale for undergraduate populations. Because obviously college undergraduates are going to have different kinds of major life events. So that's just it just uses a different population for that. And these ongoing sort of daily hassles, as they're called, usually come in the form of environmental stressors, work stressors. Sleep deprivation is oftentimes one of these intense daily hassles. The personal relationships we have can be hassles, right? And in fact, the response that you have to stress, so when you're in the presence of your marriage partner, if you're married, and we measure your stress response, that'll give us a really good measure of how likely it is you're going to get divorced. Okay? And that's work that was done by John Gottman at the University of Washington. Really interesting research. Whoops, I'm sorry. So, okay. So, so here's the deal. Environmental stressors, we think of things like noise, big stressor for people, crowding, pollution, crime. And if you live in a city, guess what? You got all that stuff. And this stuff compounds. So generally, cities are stressful places to live in comparison to areas where you don't have these kinds of stressors. But again, it's going to be factored by appraisal. How do you appraise that situation as stressful or not stressful? Now, all of these things are all good and fine, but guess what? A lot of this stuff, especially personal relationships, that can be both a hassle, but also what Anita DeLongis and Folkman refer to as uplifts. So the third scale in this packet is the hassles and uplift scale. And the deal with the hassles and uplift scale is that just before you go to bed, sit down and reflect on each of these items and to what degree you felt those factors of your life were a hassle to you, caused you problems, versus what degree there were uplifts. So, for example, children. That particular day, yeah. And so, for example, children. Children are both a hassle and an uplift. But maybe the uplifts exceed the hassles, right? And so one of the ways this is used is to help people as they're going through sort of stress coping training to be able to see how their hassles and uplifts are changing. And are they reappraising things as more of an uplift and less of a hassle, right? Okay?
These other ones, when you're doing it, if it's never happened to you, then you just don't.
Yeah, I use a 0 score. Yep. Yep. Fortunately. Okay. So how are we going to measure stress? Well, we talked about the social readjustment rating scale. This is sometimes just called the major life event scale. The undergraduate stress questionnaire, again, good for undergraduate populations. The hassles and uplift scale, which has more to do with daily events. And this was developed, I took a health psychology class from Anita DeLongis at the University of British Columbia. And then the last one in this packet is the social support scale. And what this does is it gives you an opportunity to recognize areas that we know of that usually provide people social support and how much social support you feel from those areas. So this is a good scale to go through and start and recognize the places where you can get social support, or start cultivating areas where you're not getting social support but you can. So for example, if you don't belong to a religious community, that might be, an indication that it might be a good time to maybe start getting involved if you have problems of getting social support from other areas. Or a group concerned with the environment, or a self-improvement group, or whatever, right? Okay. Questions? On measuring stress.
How many of these should you do?
Oh, no, I'm just giving you samples. Yeah, there's even tons more than these. It really depends on, for example, if you're in a therapy or something and you're developing coping skills, the particular goals of the therapy might determine what kinds of measurements or scales they might use. Yeah. In the case of Frank's therapy, they've got a whole different thing going. So, okay, so psychoneuroimmunology, big $50 word for how your mental processes and your behaviors affect your neurologic systems and your immune systems, and how the interactive effects work between all three of these things. So what we know is the central nervous system and the immune system are independent systems, but they're interactive. They talk to each other. So the central nervous system talks to the immune system talks to your central nervous system, okay? So your brain has some control over your immune system processes. Most of us think of our immune system as being relatively, not really in our voluntary control at least. But the immune system can actually be classically conditioned, right? Just like I can get you to salivate when I play a harmonica tone, you can condition, or your immune system can be conditioned to be impaired. So this is research done with rats. If we give them a saccharin solution and pair it with, it's a sweet tasting solution, and we pair that sweet tasting solution with an immunosuppressant that suppresses the rat's immune system, so it's not activated, it's inactivated. And we do that pairing enough, when we give them the sweet tasting powder, their immune system takes a dive all by itself without the immunosuppressant.
How do they know their system takes it out?
Because we can measure, for example, lymphocytes and T cells and the kinds of cells and processes that are generated by the immune system. Yeah. Yeah. So I can, For example, with HIV is an immune suppressing disease, and one of the diagnostics, or at least one of the tracking the progress of your HIV has to do with checking for different kinds of organisms and cells in your blood. So, yeah. We also have some good data about how loneliness affects your immune system. This is in college students that this research was done. Generally, students who are lonelier will report more problems with immune system function when they're put under exam stress. And actually, it's kind of fun to work with college students because they're either poor and they want money, or they have to participate in research for psychology course credit. And you can actually infect them with diseases and see what happens, how they, how their immune system responds. But we'll talk about that in a second. Chronic stressors. For women who have been recently separated, we consistently see reduced immune system function. In addition, men who had a spouse die recently also consistently display lower immune system function. And this can be the cause of death, right? If you get an infection and your immune system can't respond to it effectively, people will die from having this impaired immune system. So it's important to have good coping mechanisms to be able to deal with the kinds of stressors that you may be exposed to in life. Okay.
It's interesting how it just says men whose wives have recently died.
Yeah.
Not women.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Yeah.
I would guess that that's who they did the study on, and they don't have data for the other group.
I think you're not right about that, but here's the deal. Most people, I think most people underestimate the degree to which men are dependent on women. In this culture, we tend to think, oh, well, the women are dependent on the men, but in reality, psychologically, men have a high dependence on women for good functioning, yeah.
In my family history, there's several cases where grandma dies and grandpa dies a month later, and then the opposite effect is grandpa dies, grandma lives 10 more years or 12 more years.
Well, maybe grandpa's kind of a stressor for grandma. I don't know.
Or these are people that were married for like 70 years.
Yeah, it is not that uncommon for once one partner dies that the other partner will die within a year. I think that's, that's the kind of cutoff where if you get through that year, you're okay, you're good to go. But yeah, oftentimes it's within that year. How are you going to actually improve your immune system? Well, for one thing, relaxation training. So you can work with a therapist for relaxation training, Frank.
It's always relaxing after the
Yeah, the therapy is just kind of a stressor, but then the relaxation comes later. So, and we'll actually be doing some of this in class on Tuesday. Be sure to be here.
I'm thinking of the movie cliche of smoking the cigarette after there.
Yeah, bring your cigarettes. So we're going to do relaxation through biofeedback training. So we'll see the effect of biofeedback on your autonomic nervous system. In addition, if the stress comes from a trauma, consistently we see if people write about the trauma, their immune system is improved. And in addition, aerobic training and stress management are always effective. This, exercise comes up again and again and again, not only in stress management and coping, but also in dealing with the effects of psychological disorders, for example. Oftentimes depression, treatment for depression is exercise. I just wish I could follow my own advice. Incidentally, this is that research I was telling you. I think this was the research I was telling you about, where they took college students and infected them with the rhinovirus. And they had one group who wrote about some kind of trauma they had experienced, and another group, was the control group that didn't write. And the ones who were doing the writing didn't get sick, and the ones who didn't did get sick. So I think that's what that was. So we've got a lot of good data and research on stress. In this culture, this is a very intense culture we live in. Your expectations for production and productivity, and as college students, you're really in a high stress situation. So it's good to develop these kinds of skills if you can.
So do you have, for instance, eating for me or exercising and all of these things are really stressful because it's a math problem every time I eat, or it's something that I have to take into account. If I don't, I know what I'll feel like if I don't take care of myself, kind of a thing. Is there things that you can do to reduce that stress? It's a stress, it's like deciding what you're gonna.
The health management is stressful, and getting sick is stressful. So which are you gonna,
Which one's which,
you're between a rock and a hard place. I think what you have to deal with is reducing the stress you feel in the health management part. So, when you think about planning or, doing whatever it is you have to do, take some deep breaths, write about it, go run around the block. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just one of those things. Just curious.
Any other questions?
You handed out I saw online the paper assignment. You handed that out.
Yeah, the paper assignment's available on the Downloads website. And as I said, we'll be doing a lab on Tuesday. It will be fun. And it will involve pain. You'll see. Not Frank's kind of pain. No. Hopefully.